You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 28th of November 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting to you live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Tom Edwards. Coming up on today's programme, Hungary's Viktor Orban is in Moscow today for talks with Vladimir Putin on energy security during a very tense time for Ukraine. Monocle's Julia Jen will be here to tell us more. Then,
these regimes will seek to rule by fear. They will seek to make fear omnipresent and all-permeating. But at the end of the day, it is up to each individual person to decide whether or not to be afraid.
Russian dissident journalist and activist Vladimir Kara-Murza speaks to Monocle's Andrew Muller for this weekend's edition of The Foreign Desk. We'll have a preview for you. Then Monocle's Lucrezia Motta brings us an interview with the San Francisco-based designer Jesse Schlesinger. What did Jesse have to say, Lucrezia?
So his first show in the UK is a beautiful dialogue between the man-made and the natural landscapes of the Bay Area.
More from Lucrezia on that later. All that and more ahead here on The Briefing with me, Tom Edwards. Hey, warm welcome to this Friday edition of the programme. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you are. We start with the visit of Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban to Moscow today for talks with Vladimir Putin at a moment when Ukraine's war effort is under ever more strain. The visit comes as Kyiv is rocked by a deepening corruption scandal, with President Zelensky's top aide raided, finally, by anti-corruption investigators earlier today. Well, to tell us more about all of that is Monocle's Julia Jen, regular chronicler of these things on this programme. Good afternoon, Julia.
Good afternoon.
Let's start one thing at a time. Let's start with Viktor Orban's visit to Moscow today. What's the kind of critical agenda here from the protagonists in those discussions, but also what we need to be looking out for from the outside?
I think there are several things here. Number one, Orban, really sketching himself out as a Russian ally here, which is quite surprising given that Hungary is an EU member. It's very much part of the kind of Western world. But we've got Orban dispatching himself here ahead of Witkoff, ahead of the US delegation coming to Moscow next week. They're going to be talking about, I think, what happens next with Putin and Trump, their sort of relationship. Obviously, we had that damaging leak that we talked about earlier this week on the show together. But I think also we've got something here being drawn out, which is potentially there might be a meeting being lined up in Budapest. So this is something that's come out this morning. Putin has said he would be happy to travel to Budapest to meet Trump. We had a potential meeting there going on earlier in this year, but never turned out, kind of came to fruition because Trump sort of pulled out. He wasn't sure what he was going to get out of this meeting. We've got that coming lined up. Also, energy. Energy is a huge thing here. So obviously, Hungary had their exemption from the US sanctions on anyone buying Russian oil and gas. We've got a crisis in Serbia. Serbia's sort of state, only refinery in their country owned by Russia. It's coming under huge strain. Potentially will shut down in the next few days, and potentially Serbia will have a winter fuel crisis going on there. So I think that's going to be on the agenda for Orban and Putin.
And obviously, it'll be interesting to see if there is any facilitation of further dialogue involving any number of the stakeholders. Orban is kind of interesting. That's one way of describing him.
Absolutely.
One imagines his interests probably run broadly in this order. Orban first, Hungarian self-interest, and then frankly, that's pretty much it. He doesn't really have any deep interest in actually delivering better outcomes from anybody else other than see points 1 and 2, right?
Well, I think he's sort of trying to push this world vision that he has, which is very much, this very close alliance with Russia. He's very interested in China as well. That sort of flow of money, very easy money, I guess, not a lot of scrutiny on what's going on behind the scenes, morals, etc., how these sort of operations are taking place. And he's very much this kind of vanguard, building this sort of alliance, this buffer within the European Union, within NATO, within these Western bodies, buffer for sort of Russian interests. But as we were talking earlier on the show, he has powerful friends in Washington now who are really helping him on that. mission.
Julia, let's switch our sights to Kiev. And it's interesting, we have again tracked, and you've been talking to us a lot about this sort of anti-corruption investigation and this ongoing drag on Zelensky's facility to kind of do his job that's being prompted by it. Significant developments really overnight and into this morning. Tell us about that.
Interesting you say, Zelensky's ability to do his job. He would actually argue that if Yermak, so this is Andriy Yermak, he is his top advisor. We've had quotes showing that, from sort of top diplomats saying, without Zelensky, there is no Yermak. Without Yermak, there is no Zelensky. They are kind of one being. His office was raided this morning. There were super striking images coming out of the government quarter in Kyiv. If you walk around Kyiv, so many of the central roads are blocked off because you just have this super high security government quarter in the very centre of the city. And that's where, Yermak's offices are in the very centre of that. And you have these anti-corruption government agencies going in there, being allowed through these checkpoints. I mean, it's a moment of high drama. An incredible TV series, I'm sure, will be made about it one day. But yes, we've had him investigated. And for Zelensky, this is a very tricky thing because Yermak has so much influence. He takes so many different decisions, and there's actually question marks over whether Yermak's phone will be taken off him. Because if his phone is taken, then the full extent of the number of decisions he's made in terms of military decisions, in terms of, to do with this corruption scandal, those sorts of decisions, also decisions that he's taking on the behalf of Zelensky that really only the president has the ability to take, or perhaps influencing the president on certain discussions. So it'd be fascinating to see if that phone is taken off him and if we have any sort of intel from that released into the public sphere. But yes, for Zelensky, he would argue Yermak is his chief negotiator now with the US. He's put him at the very head of that, even though we've had this crisis bubbling on for the last few weeks. He's put Yermak in this incredible position of power, and Zelensky might argue to others, well, I can't do my job if Yermak is in danger.
Well, Julie, just on that point, and I sort of fell into this probably slightly naive trap of saying, look at Zelensky. If it's not one thing, it's another. He's trying to prosecute this unbelievably complex and destructive the campaign as best he can with his difficult resources and questions over broader alliances and so on. Then he loses a key, potentially is stripped, denuded of his one of probably the key critical ally. But it's interesting, your take is slightly different, which is perhaps that he has the levers at his disposal to seize the nettle, reclaim the initiative, and actually he could move us past this debate and get back to the substantive decisions. Is that in his gift to do, though?
Yes, 100%.
There you go. That's an unequivocal answer.
Well, that's it. No. On Telegram this morning, there were kind of polls floating around on different chats, in opposition MPs at chats and even on news chats, kind of saying from journalistic outlets, saying, should Zelensky, make Yermak resign? Should he kind of let him go from his job? And obviously the kind of unequivocal answer is absolutely yes, he must go. If we don't see Zelensky taking control of the situation right now, and it's run away far beyond his control at the moment, but if he can't wrest that last little bit of trust that he still has, and Ukraine can't have elections, it's impossible. Impossible for so many reasons, so many citizens outside of Ukraine's borders, so many citizens on the front line, they can't be withdrawn, that would hamper the war effort. Zelensky, if he wants to bring the country together, if he wants to avoid a repeat of those summer protests, he has to act now. Otherwise, the future is grim. What will he do? Will he put his friends first or his country? And that's the question.
Julia Jen, consequential question. Great insights as always. That's our friend Julia Jen bringing us up to speed with all the latest. Plenty going on around the world. Let's cross over to Studio 2. Awaiting us there with the day's other news headlines is Carlotta Ribello.
Thanks, Tom. At least 128 people have died and 300 are still missing in a huge fire in a high-rise housing complex in Hong Kong. Over 2,000 firefighters battled the flames for 18 hours until the blaze was extinguished. This is the city's deadliest fire in more than 70 years. 3 construction company executives have been arrested on suspicion of manslaughter for flammable materials used in the cluster of tower blocks. U.S. President Donald Trump said he will permanently pause migration to the U.S. from all third world countries. His comments come a day after an Afghan national is suspected of shooting 2 members of the National Guard outside the White House, fatally injuring one of them. Trump did not provide details of his plan or name which countries might be affected by the move. And a court in Italy has ruled against plans for the world's largest suspension bridge between mainland Italy and the island of Sicily. The Court of Auditors argued that the move would break EU environmental and tender rules, but the government said it would not give up its flagship project. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Tom.
Thank you very much indeed, Carlotta. More news coming your way at the top of the next hour here on Monocle Radio. Now, in April 2023, Russian opposition voice Vladimir Kara-Murza was sentenced to 25 years in a Siberian prison colony due to his continued criticism of Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. In a conversation with Monocle's Andrew Muller for an upcoming edition of The Foreign Desk, Kara-Murza discussed his time behind bars and laid out the case for how to ensure a post-Putin Russia becomes a healthy democracy and why those plans need to be made today. Andrew began by asking Vladimir if there was a particular moment at which he allowed himself to think it had actually happened and that he was free.
Well, first of all, none of us on the Russian side knew that any kind of exchange was being prepared. We were all kept in the dark until the last moment. One day, this was the last week of July of last year, 2024, I'm sitting in my cell, alone as always, solitary confinement in Omsk. And the security officer walks in the cell. The doors get open, the security officer walks in, flanked by 2 prison guards. And they take me to some sort of a prison office. And it's a small room. There's a desk, a chair, a large portrait of Vladimir Putin on the wall. And on a desk, there is some kind of a pre-printed template of something. And then there is a blank sheet of paper and a pen. And the security officer tells me to sit down, take the pen and write in my own hand, what's written on the template. And I look at it, and it's a request for pardon addressed to Vladimir Putin, in which I was supposed to admit my guilt, express my remorse for all the crimes I had committed, and ask Mr. Putin to please pardon and release me. Initially, I thought this was a prank. I saw this, I started laughing, but then I looked at the officer's face, and he was really in no mood for humor. And so I asked him, well, what is this? And he said, please sit down and write this. I said, I'm not writing anything like this ever. He said, why not? I said, well, first of all, because, I'm not the criminal here. I'm not guilty of anything. I have no guilt to admit. The criminals are those people in the Kremlin who are waging this war, not those of us who are in prison because we had opposed it. So I'm not admitting any guilt that I don't have. And I was suddenly woken up by this loud screeching noise of the cell doors being burst open. And the same security officer barges in with a few guards. And he tells me, convict Kara-Murza, you have 10 minutes to get up, get dressed, and get ready. And at that moment, I'm certain that they're going to lead me out to a nearby forest and shoot me. But instead of the forest, they drove me to the airport, handcuffed with a police escort.
So you've literally, until you actually can see an airport, you have no idea what's going on?
I still have no idea, because from the airport, they put me on a passenger plane to Moscow. They fly me to Moscow, and they take me to Lefortovo, which is the notorious KGB political prison that we all read about, from Solzhenitsyn's books and so on. And the normal reason, the usual reason, somebody who's already convicted and serving time, in a penal colony is brought back to Lefortovo, is to be indicted with fresh criminal charges. And so I just spent a few days there. I know this is going to sound weird, but I really enjoyed them because I could have all the books I wanted. I could write all day. I had a normal bed to lie on. Everything is in comparison. And then suddenly on the morning of the 1st of August, 2024, the deputy director of the Lefortovo prison walks into my cell. He's an FSB lieutenant colonel, flanked by security guards who are carrying the bags I brought from me, from Siberia, that were in storage. And so the FSB guy, the officer, tells me to take off my prison uniform and put on whatever civilian clothes I had on me. And the only civilian clothes I had was a black T-shirt in which I slept at night. My long johns, because in Omsk it was minus 14 in the winter. You have to put something underneath the clothes when you go outside. And the rubber flip-flops that I used to go to the prison shower. So I put this on. And he looks at me, evidently displeased, and said, don't you have any normal civilian clothes? And I said, Lieutenant Colonel, I'm serving a 25-year sentence in solitary confinement at a maximum security prison in Siberia. Why would I need civilian clothes?
There's not a lot of reason to dress up.
He didn't have anything to respond to that. He just waved the guards to take me out of the cell. And just to underscore how long and how surreal that day was for me, that same evening, the 1st of August 2024, I would be meeting German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, still dressed in that T-shirt, the long johns, and the rubber flip-flops from the prison shower. So they escort me down the steps, but suddenly next to each of these FSB officers, I saw a friendly face, a colleague, a friend, a fellow political prisoner who'd been serving time all over Russia. And it was only then that I understood, because there could only be one reason why all of us would be sitting on that bus together.
All of which does prompt what I know is an obvious question, but I'm sure it is something that people wonder about, not just about you, but for people who make similar decisions in similar circumstances in many countries, which is, why go back?
Russia is my country. It's my home. I love Russia. It's an amazingly beautiful country with a lot of talented people that just happens to be ruled by criminal, murderous, kleptocratic, KGB-led dictatorship. I want my country to be better than what it is today. And you know what? Unless we do something to bring about change, it's not just going to come on itself. I've been doing this for 25 years. I came to work with Boris Nemtsov at the end of 1999, almost 26 years actually already, more than a quarter of a century. I believe in what I do. I think this is the right thing to do. And I know my country can be better than this. And I've always believed that the only way politicians can really lead is by personal example. What right would I have to tell my fellow Russian citizens to stand up to the Putin dictatorship if I was too scared to do it myself? This just wouldn't work. A politician has to be in their own country. I mean, I know why you're asking this question. You're a journalist, this is an interview. But I sometimes get this question asked by people who actually genuinely don't understand. And this is something that's really surprises me. I'm a Russian politician. This is my country. This is where I have to be. And another very important aspect to this, the Putin regime rules primarily through fear. Just like the Soviet regime before. This is the main tool of their political control. They want to make people afraid. They want to have this fear become omnipresent, all-permeating. This is how the Soviets rule. This is how Putin rules. And the only thing we can counter that with is to refuse to be afraid. To me, the most important lesson of the Soviet dissident movement was that fear, at the end of the day, is always a personal choice. Yes, these regimes will seek to rule by fear. They will seek to instill fear. They will seek to make fear omnipresent and all-permeating. But at the end of the day, it is up to each individual person to decide whether or not to be afraid. And I believe that politicians have a duty, an obligation to show others that no, we should not be afraid.
That was Russian opposition leader Vladimir Kara-Murza, and you can catch the full interview on the Foreign Desk this Saturday at midday London time on Monocle Radio or wherever you get your podcasts. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. I'm Tom Edwards. The Monocle Weekender in Abu Dhabi wrapped up last Sunday after 3 days spent exploring a fast-changing emirate and meeting just some of the inspirational people shaping its future. One of those was Sumaya Al-Suwaidi, Director of Cultural and Creative Centres at the Ministry of Culture, who I sat down with for a conversation. I began by asking about the art scene in Abu Dhabi and how she felt about its growth.
Once they announced the Saadiyat Cultural District, that's when I knew that things will really change. Because before then, not many people knew about the arts, not many people were very interested in it. The first art gallery in Abu Dhabi was established in 2006. And then we had the first graduates of Zayed University who were all part of the fine arts major. So that was also very interesting to see, because before then, you wouldn't see a lot of graduates in the arts. There were graduates in graphic design. I was a graduate of graphic design. That's what I was able to study because of the time I went into university. And after that, just things went on a roll like non-stop.
And tell me a little bit about your own creative vision, your creative expression. Our listeners may be familiar with your work, but if they are not, just give us a little bit of an idea about your practice and your motivations.
I'm a digital artist, and my first inspiration, my first collection that I sold was back in 2001 off of Sheikh Zayed. He's our inspiration, he's our hero. May God bless his soul. He's our father, so he inspired every Emirati to become who we are today. So that was the first collection, but after that it became more of a diary for me. So instead of me going home and punching a bag, I would release everything I inhale and I exhale it into my art. Okay. So it's more of like a diary.
Is it
yes,
therapeutic?
Very much,
yeah.
very much. For me, it's that's the way I look at it. Yeah. My work is not very traditional, and it's not political, it's not religious. It's very of my view of my daily life, what I go through, everything that I've been through, if it was personally or even at work. the frustrations that we go into on a daily basis. And then my work is very surreal. It's a different world that I create. Just run away from the real world we're in.
Sure. From where do you get your artistic and creative influences? I don't know whether that's specific artists or creators, or is it about how you immerse yourself in a particular scene and a particular geography? Where does what's the story of that spark of creativity? Where does it come from?
So, because I just mentioned I was a graphic design graduate, but graphic design was always very limiting. There are lines, there are things that you cannot go beyond, and I didn't feel I can really express myself in that. So what helped me is seeing Jalal Luqman's work. Jalal Luqman is the first Emirati digital artist, not only in the UAE but in the region. He introduced digital art back in 1996 with a solo at the Cultural Foundation Abu Dhabi. And that helped pave the way for me, because before then nobody knew what's digital art. And seeing that there's someone who's a digital artist and he's creating these beautiful artworks that get printed and framed and exhibited, I said, okay, maybe I have a future. There's someone who has done it before me.
Yeah.
And that really helped.
Sumaya, just finally, what do you have coming up? What are you most excited about, whether that's personal projects or things you're going to see? We're obviously on the doorstep of this astonishing array of cultural wealth. Is that what kind of motivates you and makes you most excited? Look forward for us.
I just curated the show at the Ministry of Culture and the National Theatre and Abu Dhabi Center with my colleague and my friend Walter Williams. And together we created this exhibition of over 20 artists. It's a beautiful show showcasing upcoming and emerging artists, but at the same time established artists who got the national grant from the Ministry of Culture.
That was Sumaya Al-Suwaidi, artist and director of cultural and creative centres at the Ministry of Culture in Abu Dhabi, talking to me last weekend at the Monocle Weekender. You're listening to The Briefing. Exactly 22 minutes past the hour. Monocle's Lucrezia Motta is here. Good afternoon, Lucrezia.
How are you?
I'm not too bad. It's a Friday, so one can't complain. Now, Lucrezia, you've been busy as ever, and you're here to tell us a little bit about one of the things that you've been doing, which was to talk to the San Francisco-based artist and designer, Jesse Schlesinger. Tell me a bit about Jesse. What first appealed about Jesse's work? Why was this something that was in Lucrezia's crosshairs?
Well, I got to meet him at the Fumi Gallery in London, which he was exhibiting, and at the gallery and at PAD, where so you had this double show going on. And it was an incredible conversation. And I think one of the things that really stood out to me when we talked about his philosophy was he is an artist that really pays homage to the history and legacies that he inscribes his work in. His father was a carpenter, his mother a gardener, and so he learned to work these crafts from a very young age. And it's the sensitivity, not just learning about the craft, but the learning process behind it that I found really, really amazing. You know, obviously, we also talked about all the training that he got, not just in painting, but glass blowing, ceramics, silver jewelry making. And I think at a time where the questions of transmissions in art and craft are such a hot topic, having artists that really put forward the importance of learning and trying to push sort of a craft to the highest degree is really amazing.
That's really interesting. Actually, it kind of accords with exactly what Sumaya was just talking about, which is a sort of reverence for process and learning. And I always find that these practitioners who are as much artist as artisan are particularly compelling their work. We're going to hear a little extract. Just tell us a little bit about what we're going to hear from Jesse Lucrezia.
So this show, Pacific, was sort of a love letter to the San Francisco city and the Bay Area where he's from, and sort of how this dialogue between the man-made and the natural landscapes inspired him.
That was very much top of mind as I was creating for the show, was the natural material, all of the stories that it tells, but also how can we sort of stretch outside of comfort zones and outside of expectations, and what else can it be aside from fundamentally what it is, with these sort of minor interventions that I sometimes make, and so as to respect the material, but not ask too much of it, or, influence in a way that detracts from its natural beauty. And so as I was thinking about that and developing new ways of considering what it might be, the opportunity to use car paint or automotive paint presented itself, and had been something that I've been intrigued by for quite some time, and was very, very excited about the sort of results of that initial experiment in using the material on this surface. There was precedent for me in painting these wood objects with an enamel paint in work that I'd done with my gallery in San Francisco, Anthony Meyer. And so I'd begun to move in that direction, but the opportunity to work here in London with Fumi meant that I was able to push into using automotive paint on these surfaces and really seeing what would happen there. The enamel paint is relatively flat as far as the optics of it, whereas the car paint offers so many layers that it begins to move in ways that feel unpredictable to the eye. And I think that that is one of the things that really fascinates me, is the employment of that kind of material on that specific surface, where I've like burned the wood and brushed it and raised the grain so you can really see the texture of it. Applying the paint on top of that is so unexpected, and then potentially it might provide an opportunity for the viewer to really consider and question kind of what it is they're looking at and the assumptions that they've made around that. And so it's really those assumptions about using natural material and sort of all of the tropes and stereotypes of that kind of approach to making, inverting those or maybe turning them on their head by applying a material like this, which feels so plastic and artificial. And at the same time, when I'm using it, what I'm thinking about as far as a frame of reference for it are, the back of a beetle or a butterfly wing or something like that, that kind of iridescence, which does in fact occur in the natural world. These materials allow me to introduce that into this work in a really sort of anomalous way.
The artist and designer Jesse Schlesinger, Lucrezia, is so interesting. Again, that idea talking about texture and materiality, and you can understand how exactly what you said, his sort of training in processes is enhancing his artistic expression. It's really interesting.
Yes, and I mean, if you're in London this weekend, please do catch the show at Fumi Gallery. But if not, no worries. He's going to be taking his pieces further in the US to the end of the year, and he's really one of those artists we're definitely going to be continuing to talk about on the Monocle newsletter.
Exactly. So that's exactly the kind of story Lucrezia is right that you can find. Subscribe to those. Listen out for more coverage of that kind of stuff on the radio across our digital platforms. Monocle.com is the place to be. Lucrezia, thanks very much for being with us on The Briefing. And that is your lot for this Friday edition of the programme, which was produced by Hassan Anderson. Our researcher was Joanna Moser, and our studio manager was Steph Chungu, with editing assistance from David Stevens. Don't leave him out. My thanks to them, one and all. We'll be back at the same time on Monday noon London time. That's your Friday Briefing. I'm Tom Edwards. Thanks for listening.